but yell to be heard. Yeah, right. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm seeing you there, Jack. I already made it about the certificates and to make sure that they signed them so that we had correct spelling, to make sure everything was right, so we could print if we needed to while the panel was going. And I also made one about bags being put under the chairs and where the restrooms are, and then in the event of fire, where we need to run.
Okay, I don't mean to say
I'm sorry, yeah. I just thought it would be better to do it right from the get-go instead of Are we ready?
Are you all ready?
Is Jorge recording or?
That's
a picture right now.
I'm Kathy Sandusky, and I am the regional director for Southeastern University, and I can't tell you how thrilled we are to have you here. We have about 4 different universities and colleges represented, and I've been talking downstairs, I always talk, but we have people that have come from as far as St. Petersburg and Orlando, Bradenton, Savannah. Obviously, this is a very important workshop for us to be holding. There have been so many, such interest in this. Edward Warner brought a boatload, not a boat, a busload of people. And so we're so proud to have you. We have UNF students, we have St. Leo students, we have Flagler students. So this is a wonderful coming together of different universities, we have a police person here, and a lot of folks that are interested for their profession, a lot of you interested in getting a master's degree, and we are just grateful that you've come to hear these awesome speakers. I think you will enjoy each and every one of them. I'm going to turn this over to Samantha Galvin. Probably 3/4 of you have talked to her. And let her continue on and introduce our very special guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Good morning again. I appreciate you all coming in today. I have the wonderful opportunity of introducing Dr. Lenore Walker to you. And Dr. Walker is actually going to introduce her colleagues to you afterwards. But I have it on a tiny little slip of paper, so bear with me and tell me if you can't hear me. Dr. Lenore Walker is one of our professors of psychology at our Center for Psychological Studies down at the main campus. She's a coordinator for our forensic psychology concentration in clinical and in the clinical psychology doctoral program. Wow. She's also our director of the Masters in Forensic Psychology and teaches in both programs and in the PhD in Criminal Justice program. Her research named battered woman syndrome and introduced it into self-defense cases in the courts across the U.S. She is an excellent author, professor, and I hope you would join me in welcoming her today.
There it goes. All right. Good morning. This is our first trip to the Nova Regional Campus, and we are all very, very excited to be here. And I'm thrilled that you all gave up your Saturday to come and hear what we want to share with you. We are very enthusiastic about the forensic psychology work that we're doing. And I want to introduce each of my colleagues who are here, and then they're going to introduce themselves. I'm going to do it pretty quickly. The way we've organized the morning is that we're going to have 3 kind of what I call rounds of presentations, very informal presentations. I just told them this morning what they were going to say. They've been a little nervous, so I don't know what's going to happen, but I think we'll flow with it. Remember, we're all teachers, so the one thing we know how to do is to speak in front of groups. What the first group of I've sort of called it, I'm going to ask you questions, is going to be to tell you a little bit about themselves and what they're doing. And what they're doing here at NOVA, but also what they're doing in general. Because I'd like you to be able to leave today with having a better understanding of what is forensic psychology. Lots of people ask that definition all the time. And frankly, the definition changes. In your packet, you have a number of pages. You don't have to take it out now, but you can look at it later. We may or may not get a chance to go over it with you on what I teach in the Introduction to Forensic Psychology course, the first course that our doctoral students get. And Dr. Shapiro here on my right and I co-authored a textbook on the Introduction to Forensic Psychology, and we do use the book in some of our classes because there wasn't very much information when we first started teaching in the program. So you can take a look at that, and I also have included for everybody a kind of decision tree about how we actually are using the work that we're doing to develop new programs and how we use our research to develop the new programs. What makes psychologists different than the other mental health professions is that we all have to have a healthy dose of research skills, methodology skills. We really have to learn how to go to the literature and use that as a knowledge base to help us create both the good programs that we're doing and the innovative new programs that we're working on. So psychology, which is the study of human beings, and has many different disciplines, one of which is forensic, and that means the pertaining to the legal profession. I like to think about it as forensic psychology answering the questions that are necessary to help the legal profession. But that, again, used to be just in the criminal justice area. Now we understand that we could be everywhere. Anywhere and everywhere. We've made inroads in the Department of Corrections. Many of our doctoral students who have graduated are now heading up psychology programs in the prisons, in both the United States prisons and the state prisons all over the country. So we can be there. We can be in a mental health center. We can be in our own private office. And each of us have started differently. So that's why I asked the first question to be what we're doing now. And the second one is, what are we very proud of? What's one thing that we've done that we're very proud of? And each of us have done so many different things. And then in the afternoon, you'll have two chances to see two of us in breakout sessions. We have 1 hour breakout sessions for each of us, and we'll tell you about that after lunch. So let me start. I'm going to start by introducing Stephanie Ackel, who is sitting over here. And I'm going to introduce everybody first, and then we'll talk. But Stephanie is a third-year graduate student in forensic psychology, concentration in the clinical psychology program. That means that our PhD and our Doctor of Psychology programs lead to licensure, particularly for those of you in Florida. If you finish and you get our stamp of approval at the end of the program, you are license eligible here. You'll have to pass an exam and you'll have to do all the required supervised training. But your names will be submitted to our licensing board. If you're going to go to another state, each licensing board is different, but our program tries to get people license eligible for just about all the states in the country. So it's APA, American Psychological Association approved program, which is important these days, and we get people into approved internships. I will tell you, for those of you who are interested in the doctoral program, the hardest thing these days has been to get into internships. The forensic students have had 100% acceptance into internships. The rest of our students have had between 75 to 80%, and the national average is even below 75%. So if you're going to put your money someplace, Nova's a good place to put your money. And we're going to close, by the way, the panel on where we think the future of psychology is going. So you'll hear from each of us where we think it's going to go. So Stephanie is a third-year student there, and when she came in, we take 10 students into the forensic psychology concentration, and she is on her way. Well, she's got one more year. We're not letting her go so fast because when we started the new master's program in forensic psychology, I asked Stephanie to be our program manager. And so she gets work-study money, not exactly enough money to live on, but at least it makes a little bit of difference. And she'll tell you when we get to her a little bit about who she is and what she's done before and what she's doing now. And next to her is Dr. David Shapiro. Many people call him the father of clinical forensic psychology. And when I first started the forensic concentration at Nova, our dean at that time, Dr. Ronald Levant, asked me to actually start the concentration. And it grew so quickly that I went to him and said, I can't do this myself. I really need another faculty person. And he said, well, who would you think you'd like? And I said, well, what about David Shapiro? Now, I didn't tell him we were dating at the time. I thought, let him get the job on his own. Of course, we ended up getting married. I gave him a place to live, and we hired him. So we don't use the same name, but yes, we are husband and wife. And next to me, on my first one on my left, is Judge Ginger Lerner Wren. Now, Judge Lerner Wren comes to psychology differently than the rest of us. She didn't study psychology. She studied law. But she really wanted to help people with the law. And she wanted, and she'll tell you a little bit about her beginning. When I met her, she became the first judge of a mental health court in the United States. And since that time, she is running her mental health court in addition to a regular docket that she runs. But she's had some wonderful experiences along the way, including being invited to sit on the President's new Freedom Commission on Mental Health. Was that it? I never get the title exactly right. And she'll tell you about the big award that the Mental Health Court just won, and they sent her to Holland to pick it up. So there's some interesting and fun things that happen along the way. Judge Lerner Wren's model for the Mental Health Court is the model that's used by the over 300 or more mental health courts across the United States. And in fact, Dr. Levant worked very closely with APA and with, at that time, I forget his name, but one of our senators in getting the mental health bill passed that funded these courts all around the country. And I think many of them have come to visit our court in Broward, and it's one we're really proud of, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about how psychology and the law blends in the courtroom and in working with people so we don't criminalize those who have mental illnesses. And then the last but not least at all is another one of our colleagues at the Center for Psychological Studies, Dr. Steve Gold. And Dr. Gold has also been a pioneer in moving us from psychotherapy as it is to trauma-specific psychotherapy. What we know is that so many people who have experienced all kinds of trauma, but especially battered women, rape victims, child abuse victims, grow up, go into psychotherapy to try to feel better about themselves and come out of psychotherapy not feeling that much better. And so it became clear that we really needed to find ways to help trauma victims heal from their trauma. Even if they have other diagnoses, they're not going to go away if we don't also use trauma-specific methods. And more often, the people will go away from treatment rather than having the sit there. Although I've had clients that sit there, and I'm sure you have too, for many years without getting, even touching the areas that need to be worked on. And Dr. Gold has the distinction of being a former president of the newest division of the American Psychological Association, the Division of Trauma. And he's now the editor of the journal that's being published, and again is truly one of the world-renowned specialists in this area. So we're excited that you're going to have the opportunity to hear some of what we have to say, and we're going to break for questions as well so that you can ask us some specifics. But first we're going to start, Stephanie, I'm going to start with you to talk a little bit about what you're doing, and then we'll just run down the panel.
Hello. There we go. Why do you always have to tap a microphone before it starts working? Good morning. My name is Stephanie Ackel, as I was introduced by Dr. Walker. Thank you. As she shared, I am a third-year student in the clinical psychology doctoral program at NOVA down in the main campus, and I'm in the forensic concentration. She gave a little bit of an inroad as to how I got involved with the master's program in forensic psychology. She asked. I said yes. That transaction was pretty simple. But in terms of how I got involved with forensic psychology and wound up in graduate school for psychology in general, I kind of grew up always very passionate about and interested in the legal system and in law. And I was always told that I was really good at arguing, usually by my parents. And everybody said, oh, you're going to make a great lawyer one day. And so I had that whole thought in my head that I was going to, grow up and go to law school. And by the time I was wrapping up undergraduate, studying marketing and public relations, because what do my parents know, I said, I was like, I'm not sure that law school is quite for me. It was something I was still interested in and passionate about, but it wasn't something that was really, I couldn't see myself there. And I've always felt that was really important in terms of choosing a career. What I had always been passionate about was psychology. And so when I had started to explore and speak to a number of undergraduate professors about the ways that psychology and the law intersect, that led me to forensic psychology. And that was when it all just kind of clicked, and I had one of those aha moments, and I kind of knew where I wanted to go from there. So I did a lot of research and pursuing and talking to a lot of different people in the area, and that drew me to NOVA. There are a lot of different programs in the country for forensic psychology, even at the doctoral level, and I applied to all of them, and I interviewed at many of them, and there was really only one that was on my list because I was able to come and work with the amazing people that are sitting here at this table with me. Can't tell you how grateful I am for that opportunity. And so when I heard that we were starting a master's in forensic psychology program and that all of these people would be involved in sort of helping forensic psychology to reach beyond the doctoral level and to really reach lawyers and other mental health counselors and everything, I jumped at the opportunity. It's something that's really been quite a process and quite an adventure, but it's been really a fun one. So I think that's about all I got for now. I don't want to move on to the next question yet. So.
Right.
Thank you, Stephanie. As Dr. Walker said, I've been in this field for many years. I was one of the early people in the field. I started my forensic work in 1969, so I've now been in the field for 45 years. I've seen the field change dramatically over the course of time. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, when I got my start, this whole field was regarded with tremendous suspicion and disdain by more traditional people in the mental health fields. I remember, talking to some some professor back then talking about my interest in forensic psychology, and I said, well, what do you think about that? And he said, well, I don't think very much of that. You know, the idea back then was you sold your opinion to the highest bidder. And in fact, some people capitalized on it. I remember one psychiatrist back in those days whose business card actually said, have gun, will travel. And, you know, the idea of us being hired guns was really the dominant picture of what we were like back in those days. You know, an attorney wanted an opinion, and they found somebody for the right price. They found somebody who would give them that opinion. Back in the late 1970s, I helped found the American Board of Forensic Psychology. There was enough of this stuff going on. We decided, you know, we're going to try to get some standards in there for forensic psychology. And we were fairly successful in doing that, and eventually became incorporated under what's called the American Board of Professional Psychology. And it is now regarded as a legitimate, and as you see, highly respected specialty area in professional psychology. It hasn't been easy, and there are occasional blips along the way. One of the ones threatened to derail it, and I know Dr. Walker and I, she laughs whenever I get into this. I start making sounds like rusty ball bearings. You know, I start growling whenever I hear anybody talk about forensic psychology in the same breath as profiling of serial killers. You know, because that's how it's presented in the media, and that is got nothing to do with the practice of forensic psychology. I can't tell you the number of people I've turned away from my office door. They say, I want to become a forensic psychologist. I say, why? They say, because I want to profile serial killers. I say, go to the police department. You know, you do not profile serial killers as a forensic psychologist. But there has been an increased legitimacy in the field, a burgeoning of research in the field of forensic psychology, which we'll talk about later in the day, and actual specialty standards put into practice. The American Psychological Association has recognized forensic psychology as a specialty, and you still get people who try to detract from the field. I recently reviewed a book that came out, you know, highly critical of forensic psychology, but when you really took a look at it, it was attacking forensic psychology the way it was practiced 30 years ago, not the way it's practiced now. And the way it is practiced now is really as quite a respectable and productive profession. So let me not talk any longer. Okay.
First of all, what a thrill to be here. I'm Judge Ginger Lerner Wren, as Lenore said, and you can probably hear I have a little head cold, so I apologize in advance. I'm also an adjunct professor in the Criminal Justice Institute, where I teach a course on mental health courts and restorative justice and leading social change from the behavioral health sciences applications, and that sounds like a lot. But it kind of segues into one point that I really want to make. And first of all, you know, how we were commenting earlier, all of us, you know, it's Saturday. And, you know, this is, you had to get up and get dressed and, you know, put on your school. I mean, really, you know, tribute to you all, to your passion, to your drive for being here. But for those of you who were smart enough and energetic enough to come here today, I have to tell you, I really think that forensic psychology is what getting an MBA was 20 years ago. This is, in my view, speaking now from the only presenter coming out of the legal field, that this is probably the hottest, most dynamic areas and disciplines and degrees that you can get anywhere. Why is that? Because, and I'm going to tease out a little bit, just like Stephanie did, but I just, in terms of where the law and our jurisprudence has been, and where we are, and where it is going, it is exploding. It is absolutely exploding in terms of a shift from traditional legal types of processes to the courts becoming robust and rich and delving into areas of across every single therapeutic spectrum, right, that you could possibly imagine. And no longer could legal actors, whether they're lawyers or judges or probation officers or anybody in corrections or case managers in criminal justice and law enforcement, and I heard we have somebody from law enforcement. No longer are we kind of looking only at mono subjects or types of disciplines. You have to be all over the map in terms of getting really masterful in terms of multidisciplines that affect people. Because the courts now have recognized not that what we were doing historically was necessarily wrong, but that the rule of law could become so much more creatively in terms of helping people, in terms of driving progress, growth, in terms of helping cultures transform, in terms of community restoration, individual restoration, and what we can do to really, from a human rights and civil rights perspectives, reduce what we've all been reading about in terms of the horror of failed policies, for example, on the war on drugs, or what's happening in terms of the damage and collateral consequences of mass incarceration. So you have just really what I would describe as very big picture issues that, believe it or not, I mean, lawyers and judges that, never thought we'd have to wrestle, with these types of vexing social problems, yet they land on our doorsteps. And we have been, because of pioneers that are in this room and many of our wonderful friends, have been brave and bold enough to say, look, because of justice, somebody has to take ownership. And how that happened, we'll tell the story more later on today. But this is the field. It is just extraordinary. And I'm so grateful that you are here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Gold. I've been at Nova Southeastern University since 1982 on the faculty of the clinical doctoral program. So originally, I was a clinical psychologist in addition to being on faculty at Nova. Since I've come to South Florida, I've pretty much always been in private practice. And so I want to describe something to you about how I came to forensic work and what it wrote. And her fault right here.
I don't have to find any of the fault for it.
No, David. She was twisting my arm. I was screaming. You might have been smiling watching it, but in order to tell you about how I came to forensic work, I've really got to talk about trauma work because I'm a trauma guy. But when I was in graduate school, there was no such thing as trauma. It didn't exist. It was only in the late 1970s when Dr. Walker used the word pioneer earlier and referring to me, which I find somewhat embarrassing because she is a true pioneer. It was in the late 70s, early 80s when people like Dr. Walker came along and identified that there was such a thing as domestic violence and came up with the concept of battered woman syndrome that we first began to recognize as a society that these things exist. I often joke that there was no child abuse until the 1970s and 80s when Phil Donahue started, if any of you remember this guy who was a forerunner of Oprah's, when Phil Donahue started to have women on his program who spoke about how they had been sexually abused as children. And so as recently as the 1970s, the foremost expert in incest estimated that incest occurred in 1 out of every 1 million families. And what we know now is that roughly 1 out of every 4 women was sexually abused before the age of 18, that roughly 1 out of every 6 men is sexually abused by the age of 18, and that this is a very, very common occurrence. But what hasn't gotten as much attention is physical abuse and verbal abuse, and then you look at all the citizens of this country who have been in combat and been exposed to combat trauma and various kinds of disaster trauma and terrorism. So when I was in the early days of and actually when I was in graduate school, one of our professors who was very esteemed explained to us that women enjoy being beaten. And it's very obvious that that's the case because they don't leave their battering husbands, and if they didn't enjoy it, why wouldn't they leave? I don't want to go on too long, but I do want to. Actually, in the graduate department, we had a secretary in her early 20s who had done the right thing. She had divorced her battering husband. And he came back a couple of years later when she was working in the department. And he came to visit her for the weekend and repeatedly begged her to come back to him. And she did the right thing. She told him she wasn't coming back. And Monday morning, he came to the psych department, found her in the lobby, and said, "Please, I'm going to ask you one more time to come back to me." And she did the right thing. She said, "No, I've explained to you all weekend. I'm not going to do that. I divorced you for a reason." And she turned and walked away, and he pulled out a gun and blew out her brains. And that's why women don't leave. Not because they enjoy being beaten. So in the early days of my private practice, I was seeing a lot of people who were in recovery from substance abuse. And again and again and again, I was hearing from these folks awful histories about growing up, not being attended to, not being taken care of, not having much guidance, and being abused in many, many ways. That's how I came to be interested in the field of trauma. And every now and then, I became concerned that one of my therapy clients might get into problems with the criminal justice system and started getting really panicky about the thought that I was going to be called in as a witness and might say something that was detrimental to my clients. And then Dr. Walker joined the faculty and periodically said, trauma has a lot of relevance to forensic psychology. You really ought to start thinking about doing expert witness testimony. And Dr. Shapiro probably knows a lot about this because there was a time there wasn't a clear distinction between a clinical psychologist and a forensic psychologist. Now you could not be an expert witness if you were seeing the defendant in therapy or one of the parties in therapy. So coming to understand gradually that I would be speaking on the behalf of people who were not my therapy clients began to allay my anxiety. And then eventually, because Dr. Walker was right, as Dr. Shapiro can tell you, Dr. Walker is always right. I started being contacted by attorneys who said, "Dr. Gold, we need a trauma expert to testify in court." And more than anything, I've been called in to testify as a capital mitigation expert witness where people are facing the death penalty who have had an extensive trauma history, and my job is to come in and explain to the jury how this person came to be the person they are. Because people are not born, they're made. It takes about 18 years to make a person. And it takes good parenting and solid families and a caring community to create a human being. And unfortunately, there's too many people in our society who don't have the opportunity to become fully functioning human beings because they're neglected and abused growing up. And those are the people on whose behalf I speak often when I testify in court.
Thank you. I'll just tell you a little bit, because you're to correct some of the adulation, which is very nice, but I don't think it's necessarily it's also embarrassing, let's put it that way. But it's nice to hear, but, in public, oh well. Anyhow, I have to tell you, the association that popped in my head was sitting back in 1985. I was invited as one of the NGOs to the International Congress on Women. I'm in Kenya, in Africa, and underneath the tree, one of the big trees, is sitting Betty Friedan, who was one of my heroes, sheroes as they say, in the beginnings of paying attention to the psychology of women, that maybe it's different than what we think of as psychology for everybody. And there she is, and with all these people at her feet. And I remember turning to one of my friends and saying to me, if I ever get that way, shoot me. Just shoot me. I don't ever want to be at that point. And I try. I think the most important thing for me that guides me is trying new things. I'm a kind of trailblazer. I don't mind being out in the middle of the ocean without having a good boat or paddle with me. And so when the opportunity came, I never trained to be a forensic psychologist, much like David and the others are saying. It was just not a field that you particularly chose. I didn't even choose to be a clinical psychologist. I was a teacher. I was raised in the era where women were told that if we're going to have a career, we should get like a teaching degree, that in case our husbands would die, see, we were all going to have husbands. That was a given in those days. That we have an insurance policy, we could support ourselves. And so the message about wanting to support myself was always there, but I sort of absorbed all the other stuff as well. So I did get a teaching degree, but then I loved the field of psychology from the very beginning, and I began to teach children that were labeled mentally ill in New York City. Now, you might think that that's a lot of kids, and you're absolutely right, but some of them who really had very observable difficulties in the classroom were placed in this program, and I was teaching in it and loved it. So I went back to school, got my master's degree in what they then called clinical school psychology. Now we dropped the clinical piece, and school psychology stands on its own as a very important and necessary profession. So I got my doctorate, and I got an EDD degree, which I love. I still keep my EDD degree, despite the fact that there are some people that say it's not the same as a PhD. No, it's not. It really was about children and about helping the schools be able to do better with children. We cannot expect every family to do the right thing, even though we'd like that to happen. And so we need to use some of the other institutions in society to be able to help those people who need a little bit more. And I enjoyed doing that work. I went to work at Rutgers Medical School in those days and became much more community school oriented as a psychologist. Forensics was as far from my mind as anything else at that point. But I got very involved, as they said, in doing the research on battered women. I had a big research grant from the United States government. And in doing that work, I became asked to give some lectures on what we were finding about battered woman syndrome. And I was at a big conference in Seattle, Washington, where somebody asked me a question from the audience. And basically, they phrased it as a question, but it was a challenge. that women are dying every day who are from abusive husbands. You're saying that we have to change society in order to stop the abuse of women and children. Then what are you going to do about those women that are dying every single day? And not one to not accept a challenge. I thought about it for a minute and I said, well, you know, if anybody is in the middle of an altercation or a fight and they're about to die, they have the right to use self-defense. And so I'll testify to self-defense. So little did I know that there were people from the media in the audience at the time. And by the time I went from Seattle back to Denver, Colorado, where I was living at the time, I had my first case. A lawyer from Montana said, Dr. Walker, and I can't mimic his accent quite as well, it's real Western kind of drawl. He said, I just have this newspaper right here in front of me, and it's got a headline, Noted Psychologist Will Defend Battered Women Who Kill. Had no idea that this would happen. And so I'm sort of like backtracking now. I said, well, Mr. Moses was his name. I said, honestly, the only time I had been in court before was for a divorce and to pay a parking ticket. I don't have a clue what I would do to defend a battered woman or anybody. And he said, listen, I've been a lawyer probably longer than you've been alive. He said, I'll teach you how to use the information if you can teach me everything that's known about battered women. This was like 1978, I think, 77 or 78. And I said to him, well, Mr. Moses, there is very little to be known about battered women at this point. I can know everything that's in the literature. I can teach you that. I mean, the leading article in those days was something called The Frigid Wife Beater's Wife. And that is exactly what we've been talking about, was the image. So I said, okay. I got on a plane. I went up to Billings, Montana. Now, I was from New York City. Going to Billings, Montana was the most foreign thing I could have done at that point. I get off, and there's these two men who were like 6'6", with 10-gallon hats on their heads and snakeskin boots. I can still see them in my mind's eye. Who came, one of them was the investigator and one of them was the lawyer. We became very good friends over the years. And I evaluated the woman using my clinical skills, because that's one of the things that clinical psychologists learn to do, is we learn to do assessments and come up with diagnoses. I had no doubt that she had been a battered woman. In fact, when the police came in after she had shot her husband, they said it was about time. So he was not a particularly well-liked person. So we had a lot of things going for us. And so Mr. Moses taught me how to testify, how to take all that information, put it together to be able to testify as an expert witness. And guess what? This woman charged with first-degree murder was found not guilty by reason of self-defense. I mean, I was so excited. I thought, this is easy. Little did I know. And the second case that I did was because the lawyer from Washington, D.C., which was the second place that I was, he had, his mother lived in Montana. And she got the copy of the Billings Gazette, clipped it out, sent it to him in Washington, D.C., and said, you know, son, that woman you're defending, maybe you should look at this woman. Look what she did here up in Billings. And so he called me, and I went to Washington, D.C., did the same thing, did the evaluation, said, yes, she's definitely a battered woman. And they snuck me into the courthouse. And within 2 minutes, I don't know what's going on, everybody clears the courthouse. And they say, we're going to take a proffer of your testimony. In other words, they were not going to allow me to testify. They challenged it. Nobody challenged it in Montana because that was the West. And, you know, if you shoot somebody in self-defense, it's too bad, but it's self-defense. In Washington, D.C., that was just not going to go over well. And so, and the person who was killed was a very popular neurosurgeon there. Well, in the end, they did not allow my testimony. I got back on the plane and said, oh, well, there went my new career. Easy come, easy go. I'm just going to have to go back to being a regular clinical psychologist. Indeed, what happened then was that the case was appealed. And it was the appellate courts that wrote opinions that were published in the law journals that got my name out to everybody. That's how people found me. So not getting to testify was better than testifying for me and my career. Not so, although for the women, I learned later that the law clerk who was in that courtroom turned out to talk to the judge about it, and the judge only gave her a 2-year sentence. This is before sentencing guidelines, and said, hey, you know, this is very impressive. I couldn't let the testimony in. It was too new, but it was impressive. And then began 20 years of trying to get this testimony into different states with APA's assistance, because they tried to keep it out, saying my research wasn't good enough. But if you get an NIMH grant in those days, it means your peers have reviewed your methodology. And APA wrote an amicus brief that said, look, you want to keep the testimony out, that's okay. You're lawyers and you have the right to do it. But don't do it because you say it's not good psychology. It is good psychology. And they continue, APA continues to put in amicus briefs in these kinds of cases. And that's how we sort of move ahead with the law being a living profession that keeps growing, and psychology that keeps growing. And so it's a little long story about it, but I wanted to give you an idea of how these things happen. Sometimes it's serendipitous. And now, of course, I head up with these programs in forensic psychology and love doing it. I couldn't think about doing anything else. Oh, that's right. That was the next question. I answered the next question too. The next question then is, what is your most impressive or favorite moment that you want to share with us about your work in forensic psychology?
My story will be shorter than I'm sure the answer to this question from... I thought it was already on. I thought I only had... Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Oh, okay. Very good. I don't do microphones very often. I'm a very loud person naturally, so I don't typically need them. I haven't been in the field, obviously, nearly as long as anyone else that I'm sitting up here with. So I don't have, quite as many of the kind of big moments and things. But in terms of what I'm doing now, I can't tell you how invaluable the training has been that I've gotten in doing assessments and assessing children for child abuse and parents. Oh, okay. Is this better? Somebody in the back, raise your hand if this is better. Okay. All right. Very good. The training that I've been getting working in jails and doing assessments for child abuse and writing reports for the court has been invaluable. But in terms of what I think I'm most excited about for what I've actually done so far is my work with the master's program in forensic psychology. I'm passionate about helping to spread this to all the different areas and sort of consumers of forensic psychology that we're reaching, and helping to really help everyone to come onto the same page, because we can have this group saying we need to be doing this and this group saying we need to be doing that, and we noisy psychologists in the background shouting, but wait, the research is saying something different. But if we're not all together in this, then we're not going to make as much change, and we're not going to do it as effectively for the people who need it the most. And so finding ways to really improve education and be able to really help spread the access to that. By doing it online, we're able to reach people all over the place and have a lot of people get great access to our impressive faculty. We even have one of our current students here. Cynthia, you want to raise your hand for us? And, she doesn't live in Fort Lauderdale. And we have people that are all over the place, different time zones. We have international students at this point. And so we are helping to be able to sort of reach out and everything. And I would have to say that being involved with this is something that so far in my very young career, if we can call it that, is something that's been particularly special for me. So.
Stephanie is right on the cutting edge. She's going to tell you that.
So one of the things that we're doing with the program is that because we know that learning online is challenging in a lot of ways, because it's not the same as being in a classroom, and it's not the same as being able to go into Judge Lerner Wren's court and watch exactly what's going on and everything. We are trying to find new ways to simulate and mimic that experience and to kind of give everybody the closest look they can at how this works. Because I would venture to guess that a lot of you have probably not been in a courtroom, probably not, walked through the halls of a jail, all those kinds of things. I hadn't until I started here. And they were experiences that were very new and they were very foreign to me. And even though I tried to keep the straight face and, this is no big deal. I mean, it's a big deal. The first time that you walk into a jail and they let you back out without fighting with you about it, it's a big deal. So, I guess walking into a jail in any respect is kind of a big deal, but it's something we don't get to see. And the training we have felt is lacking in that area. And so in terms of wanting to improve the program and kind of be ahead of the curve and be ahead of where our students are thinking we need things, we are working on developing virtual simulations of virtual courtrooms, virtual jails, and trying to simulate any of these different situations to really help people get an image of what they're going to be learning and allow people to create avatars. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the technology, but basically a little virtual representation of yourself. Or any of us up here. We'll all get one. And, it's a no dye. You don't have to wear the gloves to just transform the whole look. And to allow students to even have avatars and to go into these experiences and go into these new worlds and really get to see how all this plays out in real life. And everybody's controlled by another human being on the end of the computer, and it really helps because we don't have to pay to fly them all down to Broward County Court. I mean, they don't, like Dr. Walker said, they don't pay me enough for that. So there's no, I gotta do it over the internet. But it's really, it's been something that's been kind of an adventure, learning how to make all this work and how to bring it all together. But I think that in the end, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be delivering a much better sort of educational product for our students, because we'll be kind of helping to pull them into our world. And also letting them guide us. From there, when they see what the possibilities are, they can continue sharing what their needs are and kind of where they would like the field to go. And if they're going to be in charge of the field in the future, then they should be, I think, directing in a lot of ways the experiences that they get. So we're going to just keep trying to meet them. But I'll keep you guys posted. When we get that technology up and running, I'll let you know.
Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
It's incredibly exciting. And I find myself sort of saying, I'm at the stage in my career now, well, I've accomplished a fair amount. There's all of this exciting new stuff going on. Can I really get into it? I don't know. You heard Judge Wren say, she wants to be an avatar. I'm not a blonde avatar. Okay, but I'm not really. I haven't come to grips with that. You have to understand. Yeah, you have to understand. I came into the computer age, kicking and screaming. I got my first computer 15 years ago. So, prior to that time, all of this technology was completely alien to me. So, I've had to learn a lot in 15 years. There's a lot more to learn. So,
You finally got an iPhone.
Yeah, I finally got an iPhone, but...
And you can answer it.
Oh, and my daughters are amazed that I know how to text, But anyway, as Dr. Walker was saying, what is, the most outstanding moment? And I really can't put my finger on any specific moment, but I hinted at what it was. It's a series of moments. It's a general feeling of the way the field has changed, the way the field has become legitimate, the way it's become an accepted field of specialization, field of special study, how there is now board certification in the field, how students are coming. I mean, one of the proudest thing, and I know this is for all of us, to look at our students like Stephanie and many others like her who are finishing our program and are going off and practicing forensic psychology in the way that none of us ever knew that it would be practiced. We didn't even imagine that kind of thing. I've said to Dr. Walker, you know, we have single-handedly changed the face of correctional psychology. It used to be, you know, back, you know, not many years ago, 20, 25 years ago, that the only psychologists who wound up working in correctional facilities were those who had gotten in trouble with their licensing boards. And, you know, they say, well, okay, go work in a prison, go work in a jail. You can't really hurt anybody there. You know, so you know, people who had psychotherapists who had gotten involved in sexual misconduct, having sex with their patients, that's where they would wind up. I even remember one case in which I was testifying because I was the chief psychologist at a maximum security prison. And they were asking me during a deposition, somebody was suing the prison, you know, why I was in the Department of Corrections. And I said, I'm not sure I understand your question. And they said, well, you know, you could be doing many other things. Why are you here? They were trying to get me to say, well, you know, I was convicted of having sex with a patient or something. I said, well, no, I saw a challenge here. Oh, come on now, doctor. What sort of discipline did you have that wound you up in the Department of Corrections? Well, that sort of stuff no longer goes on. You know, correctional psychology is a legitimate field. It's got a field of specialty standards of its own. And this whole idea of the legitimacy of the field has been, I think, my proudest sense of having worked for 45 years in this field. The development of forensic research, and it's become incredibly sophisticated. Even outside of our clinical work, forensic psychologists do work on eyewitness identification, on jury selection, on a whole range of other areas. There's been a development of specialized psychological tests that are used within forensic settings. These are called forensic assessment instruments. They are validated within forensic settings rather than taking our standard tests and trying to force them, you know, put a square peg in a round hole, trying to force them into a mold where they answer the forensic questions, which they really don't. So this has all been very exciting and just a tremendous development in the field. And with all of the computer technology, it's only going to continue developing. You folks are really in the ground level of a very, very interesting and exciting field. All right. Dr. Walker asked that I should mention one case. We do occasionally get, you know, particularly high-profile cases, and Dr. Walker, I'm sure, will talk to you about some of hers. One of mine was Lorena Bobbitt. Does that name ring any bells? Okay. Now, people laugh when I say I examined Lorena Bobbitt, you know, for her defense attorney. Yeah. Well, for those who does not know about Lorena Bobbitt, please just. Okay. Lorena Bobbitt was a battered woman who, one time when her husband was beating her, got a kitchen knife and cut his penis off. Okay? Then she threw it out the window. She drove away and threw it out the window of her car. Anyway, needless to say, it was a very high-profile case. I was in the greater Washington, D.C. area. This happened in Northern Virginia. So I was called to testify. They were actually, it was very interesting because, as you heard Dr. Walker say, many states, following her research, adopted battered woman syndrome as a legitimate defense. The state of Virginia never did. So in Virginia, you were either insane or not. That was the only defense available to you. And I was prepared to testify that she was a battered woman and she was acting in battered woman self-defense. And the lawyer said, sorry, that's just not going to cut it. You got to testify that she was insane. And I said, but she's not. You know, there's nothing in my evaluation that says that she's insane. So, you know, wound up not actually being called to the witness stand, though I did a great deal of consultation. Dr. Walker and I, several years later, were we were doing a presentation on forensic psychology in Greece, in Athens. And, of course, it was all being translated. So Dr. Walker introduced me as the man who examined Lorena Bobbitt and, what was it, and lived to talk about it.
No, got away, and I could testify that he's fine.
Yeah, that's right. Now, of course, you know, as I say, it was being translated, so she said it, and then there was a little pause until the translation took effect, and then everybody started laughing. You know.
You have to spice up your talk.
Absolutely. But, you know, again, that was one of the other things that I wanted to talk about when we get talking about what is the future. You know, one of the things I see as the challenge of forensic psychology is to work with the judicial system to overcome some of these artificialities, like I couldn't testify about the fact that she was a battered woman because there was no legislation in that state regarding that. I could only say she was insane or she wasn't insane. So, you know, I think a big part of what we need to do is to work with the judiciary, understand what the legal system, what the judicial system understands about psychology, what we understand and don't understand about the judicial system. I really advocate, you know, and maybe we'll get into this later, for a non-adversarial system where the actual issues, the important issues, don't get lost in a bunch of, well, my expert's better than your expert kind of challenges. Okay, enough said.
It's a great segue to Judge Lerner Wren, who's got some ideas about that.
Yeah, a couple. A couple. You know, I guess I thought let's be honest in the room. How many of you thought about going to law school? Come on, yeah. You know, the law, always seemed and has been, look, everybody thought you become a lawyer, right? And, your life is made, you're doing great work, you're going to have this brilliant career, you'll be like one of those TV show people. And, the truth of the matter is that I never thought about doing anything else in my life. From when I was just little and maybe something traumatic happened. We'll talk about that at lunch. And so, but and I just, I just really wanted to get into that legal field and really felt like, I really wanted to make a difference. I mean, my family values, really taught me, and I know that so many of us share that, you want to make the world a better place. Nothing greater than that, just really profound, but very, very simple. And so, I was disillusioned when I got out of law school that I just couldn't get a job. I really wanted to do, some public interest type of work, civil rights work. It wasn't working out. I actually made an appointment at Nova I think the year was somewhere in the early 90s. I graduated Nova Southeastern University Shepherd Broad Law School, that back then was called Nova Law Center. So it really has evolved tremendously since I graduated from law school in 1983. And I know I look young. And thank you. I feel so much better. And, and I went and I made an appointment with two they were fabulous professors at the psychology center. And they looked at me and I think I had one or two, I can't remember now how many kids I had at the time. New mom, early mom. And they looked at me and they go, "You can't go to get your doctorate in psychology. What are you thinking? I mean, it's going to be another 8 years of school. You've got kids. Go get your mental health counseling license or something. It'll be a couple of years. And if that's what you want to do," and I'm like, "That's not what I want to do. I mean, I'm changing the world. I don't know. That is not what I want to do." So I quit law for a couple of years. I went in. You can't really quit law, by the way. You can't quit anything. And but I retired a little, and I reevaluated. Right, did that fabulous inner work that we all love so much in this field, and kind of retrofitted, redid the chairs on the deck, type of work. You know what I'm talking about. Really got in there deep. A lot of Joni Mitchell back then, right? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And so this day now, I don't know who it would be, but you know what I'm saying. Something indie. And so I think the idea was that when I came back out, to be able to marry, what I love so much and needed to do from a legal vantage point together with trying to think about how to do it humanistically. How to create a more humanistic type of legal application of the work was something that I recognized was going to be the path. And so, my as soon as the Lenore talked about the synchronicity, and I think that is very valid. One position, one role in law led to another, which ultimately led to me running for a judgeship. But when I came into the judgeship, I brought with me at that juncture some very unique skill sets, dealing with specializations in doing civil rights work for individuals with disabilities. Specifically, my last role before running for judge with the most adorable iced, spiced gingerbread cookies that you could ever imagine is what I ran for judge with. Ginger for Judge cookies. They're legendary. Legendary. It's true. It's true. Little Debbie's. I know. Do they come out of here? They sound Southern. I don't know. Somewhere. And, so my last role was I was asked to oversee a federal class action on behalf of Florida's protection and advocacy system that's actually federally funded. It's a watchdog group. It has actual federal statutory powers. And they asked me to come on and oversee on behalf of the plaintiffs and be the monitor for this consent decree, very highly controversial at the time, very unlike any type of settlement agreement that was brought over these, psychiatric hospitals that we read about and heard about and understand as snake pits and see in films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and they still exist. I mean, I'm not saying it's over. We know it's not over. You could read about it every day in juvenile justice facilities and anything else you could imagine. So I'm not suggesting that the horror is over. But back then, that was the paradigm, the institutionalization of the mentally ill was, in fact, the paradigm, and this was probably a new wave of federal class actions where the design of the lawsuit was not to really focus essentially on improving the conditions of the hospital per se, but to actually focus on the capacity building of the community-based system of care, driving the driving the development of the mental health treatment and service community-based system of care. And does everybody understand what that means? System of care? Okay. You know, I hope I'm not going to give you bad news. I know.
It's like a Band-Aid. Just do it.
Do it? Do it? Oh my gosh. Well, we have doctors here. You know, Florida is probably now the 50th funded state in the entire country for mental health services. We were 49th. Bless you. Thank you for helping me. But what happened in May in Texas? Anybody know? A lot of bad stuff happened in Texas. But something good happened in Texas, and that is that they just infused, and they've done this over years now, since the President's Commission, which Lenore referred to earlier. They strategically have now aggregately infused $1.77 billion into their statewide system of care in Texas, intentionally trying to lift themselves up from a statewide vantage point and, of course, being highly motivated and incentivized by all of the gun violence and school shootings, particularly Sandy Hook. At least that was the quotes coming out of the New York Times and some of the other articles of recent. So, histories, and so, the system of care issue for me, I came to the judiciary with a very strange skill set. I became an expert in systems of care. I became an expert in psychiatric rehabilitation. I became an expert in consumer political movement issues because that was a very big consideration of our plaintiffs, is doing the right thing by the mental health consumer population, making sure that whatever we built and developed throughout this federal class action that in fact impacted almost the entire southern half of the state of Florida. And it was a really big deal. It was called Sanborn versus Childs, Lawton Childs, Walking Lawton, coming out of Lakeland, one of our greatest governors, quite frankly, we've ever had, I think, was the governor at the time. Jeb Bush succeeded him. And just to kind of help you with your history, see where we are. So essentially, when I came to the bench, I always knew as a judge that, well, I have all these funny skill sets dealing with individuals now, a specialized skill set dealing with individuals with mental illnesses all across the map. What am I going to do with it? I don't want it to go to waste. And, I actually went privately to my chief judge who, I never did a criminal case in my life, but when I got, those cookies, they worked so well that I didn't even have any opposition. I just got in without ever getting to the ballot, so I got in early. Upon qualifying, I never had to get to the actual election because if I did, I'd have to call him because I'd be so anxious. I'm glad that happened. So, but I had a lot of time, and the chief judge at the time basically said, you're going to serve on our criminal bench. And I went, oh my gosh. And he said, at the main courthouse. And I said, oh my gosh. Because new judges typically do not go to the big show. They go to satellite way little courthouses on outskirts, outlier courthouses where you can't do any harm. It's kind of like the psychologists going to the jails, don't do any harm, you can't practice and hurt anybody. And, right, you were saying? So I thought to myself, I am in so much trouble. And And yet, the good news was I had 5 or 6 months to study up. And I did, and I worked extraordinarily hard, made sure I could script everything out so I didn't look too foolish up there. But the good news when I came to the bench is that Broward County, and everybody knows where Broward is, right? Broward, it's Fort Lauderdale, right? You've been there. And there was just this confluence, we'll talk about it later in the breakout sessions, that this confluence of things that happen, all bad, some good, but all bad. It's kind of like things happen. And they just decided, we really want to do something to help individuals in our local criminal justice system, in the jail system, who have serious mental illnesses, but they didn't really know what that something would be, number one. Number two, they had no money, but they still wanted to seek solutions, and they formed a task force led by one of our circuit judges, and the task force was very interdisciplinary, had all the right people, all the really influential stakeholders who were movers and shakers, and they met, and they talked, and they met, and they talked. And I think you know where this is going. They couldn't decide on anything. But one thing that did work, and that, I think we all recognize, and if you don't, this is probably going to be the greatest, most priceless piece of information that I'll give you. Because Rosalind Carter gave it to me many years ago. And that is the most important currency that you will ever have in your life, in your career, is relationship building. That's Rosalind Carter's remarks to a private dinner for the members of the President's Commission on Mental Health under George Bush, which was only the second President's Commission on Mental Health. The first President's Commission on Mental Health was Carter's. And whose idea do you think that was? Rosalind's. Right. And that's right. And so, all that time with the task force coming and meeting and talking, everybody did get on the same page, at least as to one very, very profound fact, that something had to change, and that if they could reach consensus, everybody was into it. Everybody was going to thumbs up, let's do it. And finally, thank goodness, something had to give. And I think that the urban myth around the courthouse regarding this is that, Howard Finkelstein, the public defender of Broward County, who has his own news show, and he's very charismatic. Help me, Howard. Everybody loves him. He's amazing, an agitator from way back. Basically said, this is enough. I've had it. And the circuit judge leading the group says, what is it that you want? And Howard said, I want my own, if it's okay. Thank you. My own effing court. And, he didn't really, and he'll say it to this day, this was not, talked about methodology earlier. It wasn't like this was done in a really fabulous way. It wasn't like anybody did any evidence-based reviews to see whether or not a specialized court would even work. It really had no predecessor that we knew about. But the idea that this rookie judge, who's going to be a blonde avatar, was somehow met the needs at the time of a community who was ready for change. And we talked a little, now you learned a little bit about cultural change. We'll talk more about it later. But I do think that going back just to answer the question now briefly, is what is the most important thing that you have done, through forensic psychology, and that is changing the narrative. I think changing the narrative of the criminalization of the mentally ill in this country has been by by far. To be able to get up in state after state or community after community, really with the mantra that this is America. This is America. And we don't put people in jail because they're sick. I think was probably it. Correct? Right, good.
Sorry. It's a great story.
Yes.
How many of you know Howard? From television?
Help me, Howard.
It's local, South Florida.
He's local on Channel 7 News. He is quite a change agent.
Very passionate, very charismatic.
Absolutely.
So I think the question was to talk about some special moments. Actually, a lot of times when I'm doing forensic work, it's a special moment for me because as a therapist, I very much agree with what Rosalind Carter told Judge Lerner Wren, that it's about relationships. And for me as a therapist, someone who's often sitting alone in a room with someone who's struggling and in a lot of emotional pain, it's really all about the relationship. It's all about the connection that I establish with that person, which in some ways puts me at variance with the rest of where the field is going currently, with a lot of preoccupation with interventions and strategies and what are you going to do and is it scientifically based. Actually, what the science shows is the quality of the relationship that a therapist has. Look at all these bobbleheads. That the quality of the relationship that a therapist has with the client is much more determinant of how well therapy goes and how much the client gets out of therapy than the particular techniques that you use. And so one of the things that's really, from someone who was terrified of doing expert witness testimony and had to get my arm twisted repeatedly by Dr. Walker before I finally broke down and did it.
I don't get any credit for the arm twisting.
Okay, you can have a little bit. What I've discovered is how gratifying it is to be working with people in these settings. So often when I go speak to a defendant, and I've worked in various cases, types of cases, but most often I'm called in capital cases in the second phase, the sentencing phase, where my job is to explain to the jury why it would not be a good idea to execute the person who they have already found guilty of murder. And so when I go to speak to a defendant to evaluate them in jail or in an appellate case in prison, they've often been told by their attorneys for months and years, don't talk to anybody because they don't want the defendant saying anything to anyone that could be used against them in court. And sometimes, after months and years of saying that, they forget to let the defendant know that there's a shrink that's going to be showing up to talk to them and that they should talk to this person. So I really have to work sometimes to try and win the confidence of the person that I'm speaking to so that they'll open up to me. One situation that really stands out is that I went to see a defendant at the last moment. This was not a capital case, but it was someone who was facing some very serious criminal charges. And so the attorneys didn't have time to let the defendant know that I was coming. So I met with the defendant, I started interviewing him, and it was clear he was shut down. He was not interested in talking to me. He was very, very guarded. And gradually, as the interview continued, because usually when I meet with a defendant, it's for several hours, he began to warm up. I found out some very, very important things that were crucial to his defense. And eventually I said, okay, I think we're done for today. And as I was leaving, he said, when are you coming back? So it's moments like that are very powerful for me. In terms of testimony, one of the situations that stands out, often when an attorney contacts me, what they're interested in is Dr. Gold, you're a trauma specialist. We want to know if our defendant has PTSD. And it's always seemed to me, for me to get up on the witness stand and say, this person has post-traumatic stress disorder, is going to lead to nothing more than the jury yawning. Yeah, so what? So the person has post-traumatic stress disorder. And what the jury really needs to hear, especially in a capital mitigation case, where my job is to explain to them why it may not be a good idea to execute this person who they've already found guilty of murder, is for them to hear the story of how that person got there. And when I'm called in on a case, the attorneys recognize that there's a lot of trauma in the person's background. And so often the stories that come into focus are just unimaginable kind of things. And there was one defendant in particular who was raised literally in a junkyard in an old rusting school bus. Before I had testified, I didn't know this at the time, but before I had testified, he had 2 brothers and a sister who had all gotten on the stand and said, our parents never should have had children. They didn't know what love was. None of us was loved. None of us was cared for. We weren't fed properly. We went to school in rags. The other kids laughed at us and teased us. We were not taken care of in any way, shape, or form. And so one of the things that, in going through and explaining this person's history to the jury, I told him about a particular story that he had related to me when he was 3 or 4 years old because he felt so unloved. The family dog gave birth to puppies, and he was told that one of the puppies would be his. And he was very excited because there was an opportunity here to have something he could love. And his father said, now this puppy is yours, but you need to understand that the puppy isn't weaned yet, so you can't pick it up, or the mom puppy will not continue to nurse the puppy. Well, tell that to a 3-year-old who is terribly emotionally deprived. How can a 3-year-old understand that? So at one point, the defendant took the puppy, picked him up, put the puppy in his shirt, inside his shirt, cuddling it, walked outside where the father saw him. And the father started yelling at him and said, you idiot, probably with a lot of expletives, a lot of 4-letter words interspersed. You idiot, I told you not to pick up that puppy. Now it's going to die anyway. And the father pulled out a penknife out of his pocket. And while the defendant had the puppy inside his shirt, slashed the puppy's throat so that there was blood all over this kid. And at that moment, the jury, who had already found this person guilty, 4 of them were crying. It was a jury of 12. 2 of them don't count because they were men, right? And to be able to get through and really feel that I was able to explain to the jury that this person that they had found guilty, this is where this person comes from. This was, their launching pad. And if you continue to go through the history past 3 years old, it doesn't get better. I mean, generally the story with these defendants is if they didn't have bad luck, they'd have no luck at all. So those moments where I feel like, the jury really gets it are the golden moments.
Wow. I know all of these people fairly well, and I've learned a lot of things today about them. Did you want to say something before?
Yes, I was so impressed by what Steve was just saying, and it reminded me, one of the things we will be talking about later in the day is all of the exciting research projects that we have going on. And I'm just going to mention about one. I've got a research project that's been going over several years now on capital punishment. And basically, the issue in the research is why do juries not listen to expert testimony? What are the reasons? And while I'm so glad that Steve talked about cases in which it had some impact, there are an unfortunate number of cases in which it has no impact. And if anything, the jury tends to turn mitigating evidence into aggravating evidence and uses it to go ahead and to recommend a death sentence. And one of the things that we're looking at is the actual quality of the expert testimony. There have just been 3 recent Florida Supreme Court cases that are utterly bizarre in terms of the way they rejected legitimate expert testimony based on validated techniques and accepted testimony from people who were using unvalidated assessment instruments as somehow carrying more weight. There was one case recently where a very extensive neuropsychological assessment was done on a capital defendant by a very skilled board-certified neuropsychologist. All of that stuff was rejected. Given more weight was the testimony by a psychiatrist who had developed his own test, which he called the anger management scale. And because this person scored poorly, in other words, had difficulty managing his anger, he was sentenced to death.
Can you mention the name of that?
I'm getting them mixed up, Lauren. There were 3 recent cases. I think the case is Hall, H-A-L-L, but I may be wrong because there was also a case called Ferguson and something else. Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask a question, but I didn't want to derail the process of the panel. If I may, Dr. Shapiro mentioned earlier that forensic psychology is not profiling serial killers.
Right.
And what I'm hearing from the panel is a lot of collaboration and participation with the legal field and some very valuable work in various domains, different ways of approaching criminal justice in that field. I was in a graduate program in California, and we had a professor there who was doing a lot of work in a similar manner. It was Professor Craig Haney. He did very well. He did work on the psychological consequences of prison overcrowding, jury instruction, eyewitness testimony, capital punishment. Sure. But I can't recall his work ever being referred to as forensic psychology. And I don't know if that's because it was more interrogation, examination, and critique, or if he just, because the course he actually taught was called Psychology and Law. So I'm wondering if there is actually a distinction being made, or if he was just doing forensic psychology, but just not with that label.
Oh, yeah, Dr. Haney is, I'm not sure why it was not regarded as part of forensic psychology, because Dr. Haney's books, especially the recent one on capital punishment, is part of the American Psychology Law Society's book series. It's received in fantastic endorsements, and it is regarded as part of forensic psychology. So maybe they just didn't use that terminology.
I think when I studied with some of Dr. Haney's work, it was considered more of social psychology field than forensic. And I think that it's evolved into both. And what we have, and that's what great segue into the next little piece that I wanted to talk about, and that is what kinds of forensic programs we actually have at NOVA. We have some social psychology, but not a lot. For the most part, we are clinical forensic psychology rather than the social forensic psychology. And I think Dr. Shapiro mentioned earlier eyewitness testimony. One of the first areas that really began in forensic psychology work wasn't really called forensic psychology either. It was social psychology. And the same thing for jury deselection. Now, they like to call it jury selection, but truly it's getting people off the jury who, think will be biased rather than getting the right person on, because the process doesn't really let you do it that way. So at NOVA, the programs that we are running tend to be more clinically oriented than social psychology oriented, although we teach both. And the programs that we're talking about, featuring today, although we can talk about any of them, include our doctoral programs and our master's program. The newest one, which I'm going to turn the floor over to Stephanie in a moment because she's going to show you how we actually teach it, is the master's in forensic psychology. It's not for psychologists, and it will not make you a forensic psychologist if you complete that program. What it is giving you a leg up on the kind of work you want to do. So if you have another degree, like a master's degree in counseling or in social work or in another mental health counseling or some of the other programs, school psychology that we offer, and you already have a license, you take a forensic psychology master's degree, you are going to be specialized in working with psychology in the law. You probably will not do the expert witness testimony because psychology itself and being called a psychologist in this state and in many states is a protected title for people who have a doctoral degree. So if you want to be a forensic psychologist, you have to get the doctorate. And we have 2 major doctoral programs in psychology, and those are residential. You have to come down to the main campus, and that's our PhD program, which we only take 10 to 12 students a year in that program, and it's very highly competitive, although you do have a bit of an edge if you have a professor that you want to work with who says that they will work with you. And right now, we've got 3 forensic PhDs, because we love them and we couldn't turn them away. Plus, the other years we've only taken 1. But this year, somehow we got 3 of them. I thought my colleagues, Dr. Van Hassel and Dr. Shapiro, were going to do it, but they ended up working on the projects that I was working on. So, but they're great, and we're working with them. The PsyD program, the Doctor of Psychology, we take in approximately 80 to 90 people now, right? I think it's about that. 80, Dr. Gold says. But we usually have anywhere between 500 to 600 applicants from all over the country. And the reason we're so popular is because we are APA, because our faculty, we have 38 psychology professors in the doctoral program and master's program. That's a very large faculty. Most schools do not have it. And so I advise people who need a small school not to come, because unless you have a group that you're working with, one of our 6 concentrations or our tracks, which Dr. Gold is part, and I are part of the trauma track as well. And we have a child track, we have a multicultural track, we have a number of them. Then you could get lost. If you're an independent learner, you're fine. So you have to think about what you like and how you like to learn. We also have a PhD in criminal justice. And our criminal justice school has a core group of courses that everybody takes. And then we have tracks in them. And I work with the criminal justice behavioral science track. So I help organize that. And this Judge Lerner Wren teaches, of course, in that program. I also have, up until this year, taught a gender violence course for people who are really interested in looking at the whole broad spectrum of that and how gender violence really affects the criminal justice system. And then we have some of our master's programs. And now the criminal justice program is totally online. They do invite you to come to campus for a number of different things, especially for working on your dissertation, but you don't have to. So we decided we needed to go beyond criminal justice system for forensic psychology. As you could hear from the people that have been talking about up here, we do so many different things. If you wanted to know one thing, I tease Dr. Shapiro, that so what if you want to be a profiler? You probably won't get a good job, but if that's what you want to say, you won't get a good course in it. But you look at the courses that we teach. On that larger packet of materials that you had, there's a listing of all the courses. I don't want to take our time to go over that. You can read that on your own. But I do want to tell you a little bit about the new master's program in forensic psychology, because that one I designed with the help of Dr. Shapiro and Dr. Van Hasselt, who's another one of our forensic faculty in the doctoral program, because we said, okay, what do we think people need to know about? And we decided to do two major areas to specialize in addition to the core courses. And one of those areas were people who wanted to work as clinicians in a facility. So it could be with children. We have people working in Chrysalis or in other places where they're dealing with children who have all kinds of issues and that they are involved with the Department of Children and Families, or they're involved with the family courts. And so that's a big area, and we have some trauma courses in there, and you can read in the brochure the different courses that we designed. And then we wanted to go after lawyers. We wanted to get lawyers like the judge here who say, wait a second, the court has the opportunity to really be beneficial to people, to help people solve their problems. And we knew that because the mental health systems, not just in our state, although we have the distinct ability to be known for our poor mental health services, but even the best of mental health services, we are missing lots of people. And one of the reasons is because we've closed the state hospitals, or we've reduced the state hospitals. And so many people with serious mental illness, if they stayed on their medications, might be okay, but some of them we don't even have the right medications for yet, end up in the criminal justice system. So we wanted to get lawyers involved. I do a lot of testifying in family court for children who are in the middle of a battle that their parents are waging, and so they cannot, on their own, be able to decide what would be in the best interests of their children. And so the courts are doing it, and they're doing a terrible job, even though they're using all of us as psychologists to go in and try to do custody evaluations and help them do it. But it's not being done right. And I just finished writing a book with some others called The Broken Family Court. And I think one of the reasons why we can't fix the family court is because it's a court of equity, meaning people should be fair and be able to share. And if you're involved in any kind of abuse, each person's got their own needs, and they're not going to be able to share very well. And so for people who have some kind of abuse anyhow, those are the cases that I tend to work more with. Dr. Shapiro works more with the criminal cases. Judge Lerner Wren, although she works with the criminal court and the mental health court, she's also the big thinker. She's the system change person. And I think all of us have system change in us. And then Dr. Gold, I've been trying to get him to teach online. He has not given up yet. Given in, rather, and I've not given up. So.
Twisted hearted.
Not yet. But today he is going to be treated with a presentation to see how easy it is to teach online. Stephanie, I'm going to turn the program over to Stephanie. It's my segue. And she's going to show us, you're going to see one of the courses in the master's program online on our Blackboard platform that we use at NOVA. And after that, we're going to open it up to questions so that you can ask some of your questions. You've been super sitting as long as you have. So I thank you for that. No. We're not giving you a break.
Keep talking. Go ahead.
Because we're ending at 11:30 for lunch. We were told not to give you a break. See, we're used to teaching 3 hours at a stretch with a break someplace in the middle. So it's time for a break. But if you have to go, it's perfectly okay for you to get up and go. But we want to go through this with Stephanie, and then we want to open it up for questions. And then I want to take the last 10 minutes for us to tell you the future of psychology. I really need more than 10 minutes, but... Okay, Stephanie, take it.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to be doing right now is kind of showing you how a little bit of the technology works. So this is not only applicable to the Master's in Forensic Psychology program. A number of the other programs that Dr. Walker described are either also online or they have online versions, or even in our doctoral kind of residential programs where we're on campus, we use the Blackboard technology as kind of a hybrid model. So we have course materials and different supplemental things that occur online. And this is one of the things that usually becomes the most intimidating thing for all of us. So when we get started, and I can understand why Dr. Gold has not taken that leap of faith yet, but if for a lot of the students as well and for a lot of the faculty members, it's because this is kind of, we're used to sitting down in large groups like this and talking to each other and using those people skills. And so what happens is that this adds a different layer of challenge in a lot of ways. Once you get used to it, it's really not as bad as it looks. So that was part of the reason why Dr. Walker wanted me to show what some of this is really about. If you give me just 1 second, I wanted to have everything up and running before I bring you into it all here.
While she's doing that, if anybody has a question,
That's fine.
yeah.
Put it up on
I was just wondering why is the mental health in such a decline here?
Well, we've never been very high.
Yeah, we've never been high.
Well, part of it is money.
Money, funding.
It's funding, it's attitude. We don't value some of our clients, who are some of our citizens who have disabilities, and don't value the fact that we can help them function much better. Then we're not going to put the money into it. The problem is that my personal opinion is that the law and the mental health system go back and forth. So if you don't put the money in up front to mental health, you're going to end up putting it in corrections. We know that a large number of people who end up in the Department of Correction are people that have social issues that they have not been able to resolve. And so if you're not going to create that kind of a society, we're going to pay the money either way. And right now, corrections is got the bigger bite of the budget. Yeah,
yeah, Lenore, I'm a correctional health expert in economics. One of the issues that her question raises is, and I was going to ask, that one of the problems is in correctional health, and I spoke about this, is that we don't have enough cost-effectiveness studies to show that what we're trying to do is cost-effective. And if we can prove that we're cost-effective, then we go to the legislature and we can say, wait a second, you're either going to pay me now or you're going to pay me later. If you pay me later, it's going to cost you more. And that's really the studies that really have to go on. Also in terms of the future of the employment, you have to be cost-effective.
I think
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. But my question is this, is that it costs, what are they saying? It costs more to medically treat somebody over putting them in prison? We're talking about long-term.
No, I'm talking.
I hate to interrupt. We're going to have Stephanie do her presentation real quick. We're going to break at 11:30. And we're taking an hour break, I think, for lunch. If anybody has an itinerary, you might be able to see it. But we're going to open, once this presentation's done, we're going to open the floor for a Q&A. And I just ask that everybody speak loudly. You can stand up because some people in the back, if you're up here talking, we can't hear you. And then I'll ask the speakers to, of course, use their mic and answer your questions, everything. So go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you very much. So just to go ahead, and we're going to bring it up on the screen here and allow you to see it. Just to give you an idea of what this technology looks like and kind of how this works. So that, you know, if you do decide that you want to pursue one of these online programs, this is not something that's intimidating or scary for you. This is Blackboard, and within Blackboard, every course has its own course homepage, and it basically has areas where documents can be uploaded and materials, where you can contact your instructor. You can touch base with other students. So they all look a little bit different. Sometimes this is just an example of what a course homepage looks like. They can be set up in different ways. It looks like it's very complicated for navigating, but actually everything that you need is always along here on the left-hand side. So you have a syllabus that's always here. You can touch base with your instructors. We have announcement pages within all of our courses because we like to make sure that our instructors keep in touch with our students. So it's basically like having an electronic bulletin board. It puts everything in one place so that you can't ever have students say like, oh, I accidentally deleted that email. Oh, I didn't get that one. They're all here. It's great from my perspective. I love it. So this is kind of like, you know, an area where we can keep in touch with each other. I mentioned that we have areas where we can keep course content. So you know how in traditional, you know, face-to-face education, they give you a book list and they hand out some articles and they maybe give you some handouts. What we do is, again, since we have to be creative and do it all electronically, we have created basically an electronic library of all of the materials that are needed. Now, in some of your courses, they will ask you to go and find some of these things on your own in libraries and everything. And in some of them, we have amazing instructors who say, here are all the documents, put it up and keep it easy, right? So this would be one of those. Yeah, it looks like a lot. Some of these documents are very, very short, and some of them also didn't get covered in week 1, and so we carry it over into week 2. But they're here, and they're organized for sort of that ease of access purpose. As you can see, if I were to go all the way down to the bottom of this, you would see that we have 14 or 15 weeks for the semesters. It varies depending on whether it's summer, fall, or winter. Right now in our winter term, we have 15 different weeks. Some of those are for review sessions, some of them are for different activities and things, but we try to keep it mixed up and keep it all balanced. Another one of my favorite parts of using Blackboard is that you can use discussion boards. So your instructors can ask a question. So for example, please introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself. And all of the students can come in and they can post their threads. It's kind of like, do you guys remember when like online chatting and IM and all that was first coming out, you know, and people weren't really sure about chat rooms, you know, all that buzz about the safety of chat rooms, which was really legitimate and was probably a good thing. Our chat rooms are far more closed off and more secure, so you don't have to worry about that. But this was a format that a lot of websites used. They used discussion board threads where you can post an introduction of yourself. You can post any kind of comment, any kind of response, and then someone can get on there, they can read it, they can comment to you. So you end up getting a lot of kind of Q&A. And I know that, as we said, we have one of our students here. I like to think that this is something that's very helpful because it really allows students to communicate with each other throughout the course of the week in between class sessions. And the other pride and joy of Blackboard is the Collaborate system. So this basically, what I have opened up, I skipped all of the loading of this program part for you. That's the part where all these little lights flash and it looks like it's broken, but it's really not. It's doing its thing. If it looks like it's not working, Blackboard's functioning just fine. That's the one thing I always tell people. But this is basically a virtual chat room. So this is essentially taking the classroom or the lecture hall that we're sitting in right now, and it's putting it all within this program that you see in front of you. So right here, where my mouse is, you have, oh wait, I can draw on it. You have a whiteboard. So right up there is essentially the equivalent of the projector screen or the TV screens that you're looking at in front of you. where instructors can post information. And now I don't know how to get rid of that little smiley face. Where is my eraser? This is the thing. I make sure all of this runs. I don't actually do the teaching, so I don't draw on the whiteboard. But we can leave my interesting smiley face, who looks like he's having a little bit of a rough, lopsided sort of day. We can leave him there to keep us company. So we can put PowerPoints up on here. I could take any of the course content that we have. I actually can also take PDFs, and I can take Word documents, and I can take Excel files, and I can take charts and graphs. I can even feed in the internet within this little area right here. So essentially it serves just the same as one of these projector screens. We also have chat capability down here, where we can chat like we're in an old school chat room, except this is only accessible to members who are either a part of the course or who are chosen to be invited. So we could invite Dr. Gold if he were brave enough to try it, even if he's not registered as one of the instructors within the course. Or we could invite anybody here who has a Blackboard account and is registered with Nova Southeastern University. It allows us to chat with each other. And this is actually a very popular way that a lot of our instructors hold their class sessions, or their kind of review sessions. So basically everybody's expected to be reading the material before they come into class, and then we get in here and we can use this chat feature to discuss and ask questions and say, well, what are your thoughts on this policy that we read about? Or this new case that we just heard, was decided in the Florida Supreme Court. So we can use this as one way to keep in touch. And there also, you'll see this audio video box up here. There is also audio and video technology. So if you have a microphone hooked up, and we're not going to do that because with this microphone hooked up, this gets complicated. But basically, most of your new computers nowadays have internal microphones. They usually have webcams. All of that stuff is very easy and is getting a lot less expensive to get and add on. We do not require microphones. Well, we like the microphones, but so far, so we are requiring it then. We're
not using it very well.
Right. For the future. So basically for you guys, it would apply. I'm thinking more in terms of what we're doing like within the last week and next week. That's kind of where I'm stuck at the moment, apparently. But so far, we do not have any instructors who have solely said you have to be using this immediately at this moment. We will be moving in that direction because it really helps to create more of a collaborative atmosphere. So basically, like just to summarize, what you can do is you can get into this whole area here, and we get the whole class in there at one time. We predetermine it, just like if you're setting up a class on campus. Once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, we try to get everybody together and really collaborate. It creates a lot of group cohesion, and it kind of allows you to touch base not only with your faculty members, your instructors, teaching assistants, but also with your peers. And it really creates more of the relationship building that is so important. And that's difficult a lot of times in online programs because, you're spread out. You're all over the place. As I said, we have students in the Caribbean and in the islands and everything. They can't get here for all of these different kinds of events, but we try to do it as virtually as possible. So.
And that's where your courtroom's going to be, right? Judge Ginger's courtroom's going to be in the white backboard? Is that where it's going to show?
I hope.
Okay.
Eventually. What we may have to do, in all honesty, just because of adding an extra layer, the collaborate session function sort of creates an extra layer of connectivity. We have to get in here and then pipe through this. It may end up being that we post links using Blackboard and go directly into the software rather than integrating the software within Blackboard. That's kind of one of those technical aspects that's holding us up right now. We're just trying to figure out exactly how we make all that work and make it smoothly. But as you can see, I'm no stranger to setting up these sessions and kind of playing with them and making sure that they work. So I don't know, Dr. Walker, do we want to open up Blackboard questions now or just overall questions? Or
Go back up and open up all the questions.
Okay, very good. Very good.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I know not all the, we got all the speakers now in the room. Can we just give them applause, please? Because that was awesome. And thank you for bearing with us with the heat. We know the AC's it's getting up there, so make yourselves comfortable with the folders and fans. But I want to appreciate everybody who came out this morning. We have Edward Waters representing a large portion of this group, so thank you guys so much for coming on your school bus. Everybody else that came up real early in the morning, got some Panera. We thank you so much. My name is Lauren. I'm an enrollment coordinator here. If you have any questions about our programs or anything else you're interested in NSU-wise, go ahead and ask me. Cynthia Farmer is also an assistant director here at the site, and we're going to be passing out the survey right now. So with the pens that we gave you, if you don't mind just filling out the survey, please provide us with as much information as you can. It helps us show the success of this event and possibly contacting you in the future with any interest you have for degrees. But right now we're going to open the floor for just a general Q&A. Let's see, it's 11:03. At 11:30 we're going to stop.
11:20 because we want to do the 10-minute with computer psychology.
Okay, so at 11:20 we'll stop the Q&A. They'll do another 10-minute presentation real quick. Then we're going to have lunch. So I'm going to pass the mic to Stephanie. But if you have a question, please raise your hand, stand up, talk very loudly if you can. Yes, sir.
I had a historical question. You've been talking about the growth of forensic psychology and leaps and bounds, very respected and so on. I'm wondering about parallel history and modern history internationally, in terms of what's going on in Europe, and Canada, Australia, other countries. For example, I have friends who are involved with the International Center on Forensic Psychology at the University of England. Would you comment on the historical perspective?
So just to recap, in case anybody was having difficulty hearing the question, this gentleman was asking us to kind of comment on the historical development and also the modern integration of forensic psychology outside of the United States. So getting that international perspective on kind of how forensic psychology works, how psychology and the law are meeting in other places.
It's such a relevant, timely question. Yesterday, we had a CE workshop for all of our practicum supervisors, site supervisors for our doctoral program on internationalizing psychology. So it's very relevant. Our legal system here in the United States is based on British common law, and so many of the common law. Oh, there we go. Many of the common law countries that use the same system have indeed used forensic psychology, but in different ways. Like David and I were invited to South Africa about 10 years ago, where they were trying to upgrade their psychology requirements from a master's or specialist degree to a PhD, and they wanted to use that little piece to upgrade the training in forensic psychology. And we thought we had it worked out that we would do the training for them, but it ended up becoming too expensive. And that's part of the problem is the training is very different in different countries. I just testified in a case in Hong Kong last year. In fact, if you in my session, I'll talk a little bit about it. And that's, again, a British common law basis for the law, but it sure is different, especially with the wigs and the robes and all the formality in the courtroom that in our courtrooms we don't always have. Although in federal courts a little bit more formal. We've also, David and I teach a lot in Spain, and the Spanish court system is very different. It's, I think it's a combination of Napoleonic and something else. I don't remember. And
the rest of the question was, can you comment on a parallel history? In other words, is the respect and growth of forensic psychology internationally similar to what we've heard about in the United States?
I don't think it's hard for me to say whether it's similar or not because I think each country is so different. And it depends both on their legal system and on their respect for psychologists in the courtroom. It took us many years for psychologists in the United States to be considered on par with psychiatrists. And in some countries, there's still that issue. But many of the countries are now moving. Like Greece, for example, is another one in which we've testified and done training. So, and that's not a common law. Most of the common law countries, yes. But the others, it's moving a little bit differently. Anybody else want to say something?
Yeah, I was just the person who did the presentation yesterday down in Fort Lauderdale, Dr. Danny Wedding. His entire presentation was on international psychology, and I specifically asked him that question. What is being done in forensic psychology in other countries? And he said, great question. There is absolutely no documentation. He says, we know it's going on, but nobody has ever written, this is what's going on in this country, this is how it compares to this country, this is how it contrasts. He said, Danny said to me, nobody's written on it. He says, you want to?
And I think I just want to mention what Judge Ginger, her court was selected by an international group, and part of the reason for participating is that it got global attention for a mental health court. So I think it's beginning to develop in different countries, would you say?
Most definitely. Certainly in the UK, and obviously the need for underserved population. And that's really what we're talking about from a public health vantage point, and a human rights perspective. We should really talk about the human rights aspect of this, which is much more of an international perspective. But in the Netherlands, obviously, human rights is a very high priority for us.
I have a question. A few of us in the room are looking to be mental health counselors, or we're already in the program here at Nova or maybe some other school. What suggestions can you give to us for our interest in working with forensic patients? Whose doors should we start knocking on?
Well, you certainly could come into, once you finish your master's and get yourself licensed, come into our master's in forensic psychology, and you will be well trained, right, Cynthia? To be able to work anywhere within the system. You can do it on your own as well, but you won't have, you're going to really be doing it on your own. So if you want training in it, that's the way to go. Those of you who are not in a master's program and want to go straight to the doctoral program, look for some schools, as well as ours, that has that kind of training. When we started our program 15 years ago in the doctoral program, it was, as David was saying, it was a postdoctoral specialization. You got your PhD, then you went and got trained in forensic psychology. We were one of the first schools that said, wait a second, we can do this along with training you to be a clinical psychologist. And we're doing that now. We went ahead of the curve also with psychopharmacology, another area that psychologists are getting into. So we're saying, you don't have to be postdoctoral. You can do it while you're getting your degree. And for those of you who get financial aid, you're far better off doing it it is it's post bachelor's level in a pre-doctoral program is what we call it. So that's the way to go.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you feel that, well, this is for Ginger. Do you feel like a person who has overcome a mental issue or some kind of mental disability will be able to be an advocate as in the legal field for another? Or would you feel like that would be mentally draining for that particular?
First of all, I really think that that what we understand, and a good portion of people in this field understand is that, mental illness is no different than any other physical type of chronic illness. So, for example, it's kind of like asking, it's a great question, but I'm trying to kind of just reroute it just so we can kind of maybe view it from a different angle for a second in terms of the high level of stigma that is linked and attached to, psychiatric disabilities generally. And that is, would we ask this question? If somebody had diabetes? And I think that, the notion and the mythologies that surround this population, first of all, really needs to be shattered to a large degree. And yes, we talked about, you gave out some data. I'll throw out a little data, smatter a little data. And, so one in five Americans, 1 in 4 if you're in the UK. Maybe things are tougher there, according to the WHO. But, will have during their lifetime some kind of serious and persistent mental illness. Think about it. We know it's everywhere. I think that there's going to have to be, it keeps coming to me, so, Lenore has to put up with me all the time. But I really project, we're talking about the future of forensic psychology. First of all, you could hear it today, mark it on your calendars, but I really think the model of which we are viewing, serious and persistent mental illness is really going to change. I think it's changing. I think because of Dr. Gold's work in trauma, linking it, to all the other researchers that are working in the area of trauma, with the ACE study and this and that, I think we're going to see a major shift in the model, the treatment model, how we look at it, how we view it. Can you really just put everybody together, in terms of what used to be an axis 1 of serious and persistent mental illness? Is it a fair question to think that somebody who might have been treated, maybe even hospitalized for some kind of emotional, psychological problem, forever in their lifetime is going to have to wonder to themselves, am I going to be able to manage this? Am I going to be able to run for office? Am I going to be able to be a CEO, of a major corporation? And I remember, very clearly when we were on the President's Commission, I think his name, Tom Johnson or Ben Johnson, excuse me if I forget, but at the time the president of CNN came before the commission on a panel, and it was this amazing panel of 3, all male, which was very intentional, by the way, of major CEOs, of Fortune 500, companies, talking about the impact on their depression or whatever it was as it related to their economic and role in their company, and what were they, and how were they going to try to somehow deal with this, and how long could they secret it away, what was going to happen to the stockholders, what was going to happen to their future, not unlike, by analogy, what happens with veterans returning with PTSDs and serious traumas, and why they don't seek care and they don't seek treatment because they're afraid it might interfere with future promotions and future work in the workforce. So your answer is, forget it. You know what? You have a mental illness, you can go on and do anything in this lifetime. The question is, everybody's an individual, and yes, some disabilities are more profound than other disabilities, but it's a very, very unique and individual experience. So that's my answer. My answer is, of course, they could go on to work, and I would hope that everybody becomes an advocate for good mental health.
Is this working? So I want to piggyback on that. So, really, somebody with a mental illness could Could they get a doctoral degree? Could they function in that capacity? Could they be a researcher? Could they, have any impact on the field? I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term borderline personality disorder. When most therapists run into someone with borderline personality disorder, they run the other way. Because the word and if you go and you Google borderline personality disorder, what you'll see, the first thing you'll see on many web pages is it's incurable. These people are, and back in the day, for those of you who remember the Bob Newhart show, there was a character on that show with borderline personality disorder, only they called it obnoxious personality disorder. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the disorder, you just found out basically what it's all about. Well, until a couple of decades ago, there was no really effective treatment for borderline personality disorder. And there is a psychologist at the University of Washington who developed an incredibly effective treatment for borderline personality disorder. Very well respected, internationally known, tremendous researcher, has changed the field. And a couple of years ago, she was interviewed by the New York Times and told the interviewer that she had borderline personality disorder. So, I've worked with a number of people. Oh, see, I didn't read the whole interview. Okay, and she had been treated for schizophrenia. So, this is, and God bless her, because I think this was a very intentional attempt on her part to say there is no reason why having difficulties doesn't mean that you can't overcome those difficulties and be as prominent in your society as you aim to be. There's several people that I've worked with in my private practice who have gone off disability, which is a very scary thing to do, and gone on to be self-supporting and to have very gratifying lives. We've had people in our trauma clinic, which is staffed by doctoral students, who've done the same thing. The best kept secret in our field, I think, is that people can overcome a lot of the kinds of problems that we work with. It really comes down to one thing, and it comes down to a very old joke. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb really has to want to change. If we are working with someone who really wants to change, and the first thing is they have to know that it's possible, because if you don't think it's possible, why would you try? Then 90% of the work is done right there.
Just in response to this last, if you want, just like Steve was saying, if you want a wonderful book on a woman who battled and overcame mental illness and is now a prominent professor of law, it's a book called The Center Cannot Hold by a woman named Ellen Sachs. It is a What?
Did she do a TED Talk?
Did she do a what talk?
Yeah, on USC. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's a remarkable book. I highly recommend it.
All right, I think, do you want to hear the future of psychology from your panel?
Yes.
All right, we're going to do 2 minutes each. That's it.
And there will be more time for questions for sure in the breakout sessions and everything, because we're not going anywhere.
Right. Each of the breakout sessions, I think you probably have a listing of them. Yeah? Okay. All right, so I'm going to let Stephanie start, and we'll just go down the road. 2 minutes.
Can you tell us how to spell Helen's, the Sachs lady?
ELYN, Sachs, S-A-K-S.
S-A-K-S.
Thank you.
So this will teach me to sit on the end of one of these things ever again. Why couldn't I sit on that end?
You didn't want to be in the middle. See, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, okay. All right, following that guy next time. I feel it was what we're doing, the future of psychology or the future of forensic psychology or the future of NOVA or the future of,
mean, hopefully my future holds a license in it, which is perfect. I'm stalling big time. No, I would love to see the future of psychology involve a lot of that reduced stigma, and I hope to see the future of forensic psychology involve even more and broader understanding and cooperation. I think it's something that we've talked about, and we want, I hate to repeat myself, but to really bring everybody together on the same page. I think that that's how we'll be able to really affect the most change and the most long-lasting change. To really be able to serve those underserved populations and the people who need help the most to get help, and for those very people to not be the ones swept under the rug. So I know that's very philosophical and theoretical, but that's the best I got right now on the spot.
So are you glad that you've invested your time and money into a doctoral program?
I am, yeah. My heart flutters a little bit every time I get that email from the financial aid people. But honestly, at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that the longer I'm here, the more convinced I am that I can't see myself doing anything else with my life. And it was really funny. My current training, I'm doing a therapy rotation right now, because even though I'm training in forensic psychology, NOVA is very appropriately good about making sure we get well-rounded training experiences. And I went to visit Judge Lerner Wren's mental health court last week, and I walked out, and it was like the most excited and sort of in touch with what I really love and what I'm most passionate about I had felt since last year, when I was going in and out of jail and court and all this stuff regularly. And it was great, because I had that moment where I thought I have found what I love to do, and that's the way that I think we can make the most change and the most impact, is by following our path in life. So.
Okay, very quickly, I see the future because as I said, it has evolved. We have become a specialty field. We have good, solid research. We have ethical standards in place. Unfortunately, not everyone follows those standards. And there is still, less than it was before, but still a lot of very slippery practice going on out there. Again, people using unvalidated assessment instruments to make major, major decisions. Again, I had mentioned about some capital cases. There are things involving capital defendants being assessed with instruments that had never been validated within a capital sentencing population, being used to help sentence people to death. That, I think, is a major ethical concern for the field. When I won't have time to talk about it now, but as you probably know, the so-called Jimmy Rice laws in this state, the involuntary commitment of sexually violent predators, based on a whole faulty premise. The faulty premise is that we can effectively predict future sexually violent behavior. We cannot. The instruments that are being used to predict, the instruments that are being used to justify involuntary commitments have horrible predictive validity. The law itself is very, very flawed. So stick around, folks. This afternoon I'll go into it more.
Thanks. For me, I've came the route of clinical to forensic. And so I still have one foot in each area. I think that psychology as a whole is growing, and we have no idea where it's going to end up. We're part of the health professions, and as you know, the health professions in this country have been undergoing huge changes. We now have the Affordable Care Act. We don't know exactly how that's going to affect psychologists. Whether we're going to be able to be in our private practices, independent offices, or whether we're going to have to work in teams or in groups. We haven't really trained psychologists very well to work in teams, so we don't play so well with other people. We're going to have to learn how to do that, folks.
We're supposed to pretend to, and now you're just blowing the top off the whole thing.
I think forensic psychology, on the other hand, is just huge. I mean, we don't have to be involved with fee-for-service. issues with third-party payers. Sometimes we have to work for other organizations. Not all of the organizations follow the kinds of ethical standards that we believe in. But if you have an independent license to practice, you have the flexibility of being able to move from one place to another place. And I've watched so many changes in the field over the 40 years that I've been involved that I think it's only going up. And I actually have to tell you, I have two biological children. One is a lawyer, one is a clinical psychologist. So obviously, I'm sort of pushing the envelope.
You know, I think, first of all, I think that the experience that I had in Holland last month at The Hague really showed what the future was, because this was an international law incubator that the Mental Health Court was nominated as a top finalist for, that was really devoted to social justice and international human rights, and really looking, we were in the successful innovation category that the Mental Health Court was nominated for, and that was a 6-month process, which was incredibly competitive, highly intense. I really don't want to talk about it. I'll need him. And just to say, you know, it did involve some kind of this American Idol social media challenge at the end, but we did get to The Hague. But it taught us, I think, a very good lesson about at least the legal profession in terms of its relationship to psychology, and that is that the future is technology. The issue of courts, the expense of the courts, access to courts, trying to be cost effective is going to obviously move us into the implementation of more technological advances, and how that gets played out in terms of forensic psychology is going to be in all kinds of venues, whether it's through remote types of testifying or working with corrections to do some, support of individuals on reentry and how to evaluate that. I mean, it's just going, there's so many areas that I could possibly not think of. But I do think the future area is certainly going to be in the area of technology. I also think that what Dr. Shapiro was talking about in terms of the issue of the problems currently that we're experiencing in the area of validation of risk assessing, the area of risk and the absolute urgency to have, real, authentic, meaningful, and accurate risk assessing tools and instruments, is never going to leave us. We need it now, and I think that's probably, from a research vantage point and a technological vantage point, going to be a very hot area.
I remember sitting in a faculty meeting over 20 years ago where the discussion was that we all knew the private practice of psychology was dead. At the time, the Clintons were busy trying to do what President Obama has accomplished, which was to radically change and I would say improve our healthcare system. And there was talk about socialized medicine and you're not going to be able to be in private practice anymore. That was over 20 years ago. Whether it's private practice or not, I think that not only is there always going to be a place for one-on-one therapy, but there are a lot of people who can overcome tremendous difficulties, but only through one-on-one therapy. So the question is our society going to wake up to social justice issues? And I think if you look at the history of psychology over the last few decades, Dr. Walker is a wonderful example of this. There was no women's psychology. There was no recognition of the oppression of women and how that affects mental health several decades ago. Judge Lerner Wren is another great example of that, recognizing that we had been punishing people in the legal system who really needed help, not punishment. I think if we continue to evolve as human beings and we recognize how many people are penalized for having started out life under horrendous circumstances, and that we will all benefit if we can, first of all, prevent those circumstances from continuing, and secondly, find ways to help those people who didn't have a wonderful launching pad, that the application of psychology, and there are many ways in which one-on-one therapy is not the model that we need. When we have large-scale disasters, people do not need to be, who've been through large-scale disasters, do not need to be sitting in a room one-on-one in psychotherapy. We as psychologists need to find ways to help the community that's been affected draw on the resources that they already have to bond together and help each other through those situations. So the possibilities are endless, and the areas in which psychology can be helpful, as far as I'm concerned, are endless. The question is, are we going to move in the direction of social justice as a profession? Because we can also be used, like a lot of other things, for social justice or for the opposite. And I'm hoping that the direction will continue to be the direction that it's been over the last few decades, which is in the direction of psychology supporting social justice issues.
I think that's a perfect ending for our panel. Thank you.
Yes, applause. And also applause for Samantha Golden. She organized this entire event. So, real quick, I want to let everybody know we're going to break for an hour for lunch. We have Jason's Deli here. And so you're going to have an hour for lunch, and then you're going to do your breakout sessions. Each speaker is going to present twice. So don't feel like you have to decide on one. You can attend both, or two, I should say. Dr. Lenore Walker, she's going to do Battered Women Who Kill in Self-Defense in room 316. That's on the 3rd floor above us. The Mental Health Court is going to be presented by Judge Ginger Lerner Wren, and she is in room 222, which is just right around the corner here. A Student's View of Forensic Psychology Training by Miss Stephanie right here. Room 204, which is right down the hallway right here. Psychology and Risk Assessment of Future Violence by Dr. David Shapiro. Room 218, which is down that way, down that hallway. And then The Impact of Trauma on Behavior by Dr. Stephen Gold in room 201, which is right behind me right here. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Samantha.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate everybody sitting through. I know we're having issues with the air in here. My recommendation, you're not kidding, they're here working on it. The classrooms are cold. Pick up your lunch, go into your breakout session, and enjoy and cool down. There's water out there. There's the little packets to flavor it if you'd like tea or lemonade. If you have questions, come up.
And everybody get a survey, and if you didn't, please get one from me.
Let me also...